Hello everybody, welcome to the Market Bonsai channel again. I'm Mark de Cruz, and today I'll be talking to you about one of my favorite genus of trees that I like to bonsai. It's from the Moraceae family, or the mulberry family, and it's called Ficus, or the fig genus. The Ficus genus has believed to have about 1500 different species in it, many of them in Asia, but I think the majority of them are in Africa at the moment, with many of them being discovered as we speak. I grew up with the fig tree in India, and it has always been one of my favorite species. The one that I remember the most is the banyan tree, or the Ficus benghalensis. The Ficus benghalensis is native to India and a lot of Asian countries, but it's known for its rather large leathery leaves. Even when you bonsai them, they tend to be a little bit on the large size, so which is why you really need to have large to very large bonsais with a banyan tree. In India, they're very popular, and they usually are significantly large bonsais. They are commonly called the bud tree in India, or bरगद is also one of the other names. It has a lot of auspicious significance attached to the fig tree, or the bरगद tree. The Ficus bengalhensis happens to be one of the largest trees in India. The large ficus tree in Calcutta is about 300 years old, or maybe slightly older, and it covers an area of about 4 acres, some 12,000 square meters or something like that, but about 4 acres of land. The main tree, or the original tree, seems to have died away some time ago, but the tree, because of its aerial roots that it does have, tends to be growing outwards and outwards, and now it's moving back into itself, where the central tree had to be removed. It is in a National Heritage Park in Calcutta by the Hooghly River, and it's going to be there for generations more, I'm pretty sure. As bonsais, ficuses too can live extremely long. In fact, theoretically they're infinitely long, which means if you look after your bonsai properly, and your fig properly, you should be able to handle it down from generation to generation quite easily. The ficus leaves do reduce, and they will reduce well as long as you can get the ramification going. The smaller the stem is, the smaller the leaf size tends to be. So the best way of reducing the leaf size in a ficus, as with most other species, is to increase the ramification on the tree. You can see this particular one is a runaway shoot, which I'll cut off later on, but the leaves on that shoot are extremely large. The ficus can be grown from cuttings, and they grow quite well from cuttings, with a very heavy success rate. The ficus can grow from seeds. It has a short viability, the seed, so the seeds have to be very fresh. The ficus banyan has big red fruit, big in the sense they're about 1 to 1.5 centimeter in diameter, globose. The flowers of the ficus is the fig itself. The inflorescence is the fig, and the Ficus benghalensis is pollinated by just one species of wasp. Most ficuses are pollinated by only one or two species of wasps, and the wasps are usually very small because they have to get into the inflorescence, which is the opening of it is very small. One of the reasons why they do not normally become invasive when moved from country to country. Having said that, in Hawaii the ficuses have become quite invasive because I think when they imported the tree inside, they imported berries with some larvae in the fig itself, which kind of escaped into the environment, which being very friendly to it, well, they thrived there. And now they're having trouble trying to get rid of the ficus from Hawaii. So the Ficus bengalensis, one of my favorite trees. In India it is grown all around, from Deccan Plateau all the way up to Udaipur. I am not sure whether it reaches Delhi or not as yet, but I've seen them growing in Udaipur. I don't remember Delhi, it was some while ago, and I, in my recent trips, haven't seen any. Delhi is becoming quite well, full of buildings. So the Ficus bengalensis, a great bonsai tree. You find them in many cantonment areas where they're grown as shade trees, and in fact many of the old highways used to have miles and miles of ficuses, fig trees, the banyan tree on the sides of them, because they used to provide tremendous amount of shade for the traveler, perhaps on the bullock or on the old cart, and also later on by cars and trains or whatever else. But yes, so the Ficus bengalensis is, well, my favorite tree, and I'm sure that you will enjoy it if once you start trying to grow them. In the UK, this particular one has been grown from a seed, and the seed ficuses tend to have a little codex at the bottom. Many ficuses have that ability. They store food during season times of plenty, and then they release it to the trunk and the leaf during lean times. A survival feature that the Ficus bengalensis and many other ficuses have adapted. This particular ficus has a leathery leaf feel to it, and most ficuses that are drought tolerant or live in the dry areas tend to have this feature. The ficuses from wetter areas tend to be very waxy and have shiny waxy leaves that help ward off too much of rain, as can happen in many parts of India and China with the monsoon. So it's a protective mechanism having the waxy thing on it. This particular one, of course, has a leathery feel, and it has inflorescence on top, which kind of, I think, helps keep one, the dust off, and two, trap moisture from the air as and when it's there. The ficus, I don't think, like to be repotted too often. I try not to repot them too often. They can get their roots tend to be not as fibrous as many of the other trees that we grow, but nevertheless, if you don't repot them often enough, they can get pot bound, and then they don't quite like being in a pot bound situation either. So you do have to take care when repotting. So when you're repotting, if you repot just removing the fringes of it, you'll find that the ficus doesn't suffer at any disadvantages. Bare rooting the ficus is is problematic. I find, at least in this part of the world. In India and in warmer parts, you most probably can get away with it quite well. Of course, in that part of the world, don't try and bear with them if it's not in the monsoon period. That's the best time for them to grow, because in the monsoon period, the Ficus bengalensis actually grows down a whole lot of hairy roots from the branches and from the trunk. So the moisture helps very much with the propagation and growth of Ficus bengalensis. Right, I think I've talked enough about the Ficus bengalensis. I get a bit carried away. It is my favorite species. Another one of my species that I like and I'm very fond of is the Ficus Panda. It's a Ficus Microcarpa which has roundish leaves, but at times it's been called Ficus americana, and in fact I've called it a Ficus americana on my website, the bonsai guide, for quite some while. I just like the name, but it's most probably just a Ficus Microcarpa with a variant of round leaves on it. The Microcarpa, or the Ficus, this particular Ficus Panda variety, tends to propagate very, very easily from cuttings, and I find that any cutting that I take grows very easily with as we grow them along. Because they are from cuttings, you can even see the fruits tend to form on them as little trees. These are 1.5 2-year-old cuttings. You can take them from practically any size of stem. The Ficus does well as cuttings. The Ficus Panda is not as common as I would like it to be, mainly I think because the leaf size tends to put off many growers. Having said that, compared to banyan, the Ficus Panda is minuscule. Compared to religiosa, it's a little bit on the larger size. But nevertheless, it's a great species. It has darker leaves than a Ficus religiosa. The leaves are a lot more tough, and the leaves can become quite large if you let them. They're leathery to the touch in thickness. They're quite robust. The bark has, well, the tiger bark kind of markings on them, which is commonly found in other Ficus Microcarpa too. But this particular Ficus was much taller. I aerated the top of it up, and eventually it's going to be a much smaller tree as I increase the ramification of this particular species. This Ficus Ficus Panda is an import from China. I have a few of these, or had a few of these. I think I have now 2 of them left. But I'm going to keep one of these for myself, I think. But this is, the leaves on the Ficus Panda can reduce very easily. And again, this whole tree was pruned because it had a fungal attack on it, and I had to remove all the leaves and clean up the bark and all the crevices with I use neem oil, neem and a soap solution to help get at the bugs. The neem oil tends to smother the pests, and the soap dehydrates them, so we use a mixture of both. The ficuses in general don't mind neem and oil neem and soap mixture. Some of the other trees can be either finicky to the soap or to the oil. So you just have to test uh, what uh, what works with your trees. Anyway, look up my video on the homemade pesticide, organic pesticide. And now I'm going to talk to you about another very popular species in India. It's called the Filken in India. It's Ficus Virens is its scientific name, but the Ficus Virens is also called the lipstick ficus because it's got small, it's got pink little uh, leaves on them when they are young. So when the tree has new leaves on it in spring and perhaps in the rainy season when lots and lots of growth is happening, this is an evergreen tree. Like most ficuses, they are evergreen. But when it gets cold, then some ficuses will drop their leaves and then come back in spring. Others don't take kindly to being cold, so you have to keep them at a higher temperature. I, for one, grow all my ficuses either in indoors in my home or in the greenhouse. In the greenhouse, the humidity is very high, and the temperatures are not allowed to drop below 10 degrees. The 6 degrees at worst of times. Having said that, occasionally, if the temperature really plummets outside, and it doesn't really happen too much in London, it happened once, maybe twice in the 20 years that I've been around here. But yeah, then the greenhouse may just about get to zero or under zero. My heating system needs to be boosted to take care of that. But anyway, yeah, the Ficus virens has a leathery leaf. The leaves are a lot more, Lancelot, longer in shape than most of the other ficuses. I quite like the shape of the Ficus virens. It has lots of aerial roots, like with most other ficuses. Um, Again, this one was grown from seed. As you can see, it has quite a bulbous trunk. In terms of ages, must be not about 10, 15 years old. I think about 15 years old, closer to 15. Uh, but I've taken a lot of cuttings from this fig tree, and they grow very easily from cuttings. The Ficus virens. Let me find. Yeah, here we are. This is the Ficus virens taken from cuttings. Now, the cutting when you take it from a cutting, it tends not to have this bulbous structure at the bottom. Um, but the virens do have a great ability of making good nabari. So it's not a problem at all. The nabari sets in quite well. As with most ficuses, the nabaris are quite uh, beautiful. But yes, they propagate very easily from cuttings. Uh, I grew this while growing from seed. It's the success rate is not very good. This is perhaps the only one that survived out of a batch that I had. Uh, and in the UK, there can be problems in the first few years of these things. But when you grow them from cuttings, they tend to be a lot stronger. Of course, take the cuttings in spring in the UK, and in India and all, I guess you can take it just about any time. But the monsoon period is perhaps the best time for taking longer time cuttings if you want them growing fast enough with the humidity around and the heat being quite good. So that is the Ficus virens, or the lipstick ficus, as it's called in India sometimes. This particular one is the Ficus macrophilia. Again, grown from cuttings about the same time as the Ficus virens is growing. It's commonly called the Australian ficus. This was sent to me. The seeds were sold to me by an Australian interneter, and yeah, most of the seeds that I got grew. So I have quite a few of these Ficus microphilia, um, in, or had quite a few of the Ficus microphilia in my collection. I must have about a dozen of them or so left now. But I take cuttings from these things, and they grow from cuttings very, very easily. Um this burnt out thing is caused by slugs. For some reason, the slugs seem to love this particular variety of ficus. I'm not quite sure why, but the slugs tend to eat the back of the leaf off, and then the leaf just dies away in that area where the slug is eaten it. I let the leaves be on because the leaf helps with the part that is live still helps with the photosynthesis of the tree. If it's going to be displayed or presented for an exhibition, then I cut it off. But otherwise, I don't really fuss about it. Uh, the ramification on the macrophilia is quite coarse, and this one is 15 years old or more, and it still hasn't really ramified too much. It it was allowed to grow quite tall, which is why it's bulked up quite a bit. And we cut it back, and then the ramification has started on it. And the ramification has only been in the last few years, maybe 4 or 5 years. But uh, it's beginning to happen. So let's see. I've seen some specimens online, and it shows that are quite attractive. The leaf size on the macrophilia itself means big leaf, is quite huge. But as a bonsai, it reduces extremely well. Again, the more the branches you have on it, the more the smaller the leaves will get. Um, you can see it loves its aerial roots, and a little bit of humidity, uh, and grown in a greenhouse without doing anything to the tree. No misting, no nothing, just keeping the humidity high around it. I grow these in all my ficuses in humidity trays, large trays. Uh, I'm moving more and more towards having all my trees under on these trays because it keeps the humidity higher in London. And London tends to be quite dry during the summer time, in terms of humidity at least. When it rains, it rains. And London can rain rather erratically. But humidity doesn't tend to stay around too long in London during the summertime. So you have to provide humidity for the ficuses. And I found that lots of my other trees also seem to enjoy the humidity with it. So as a practice now, I tend to grow most of my trees, especially the smaller mame-sized trees, on humidity trays. They really, really appreciate being on humidity trays. The roots will come down from the trunk and branch. I leave it every now and then. I'll remove some of them, but in general, I like the aerial roots. It reminds me of my childhood when I was swinging on the banyan trees. So I keep them. It looks sometimes disheveled and unfashionable, but they're trees and they're trees and they're trees. And if all my trees looks the same, I'd get a little bored. The they will grow underneath into the humidity tray. So every now and then cut the roots off from the bottom. When you do that, it just increases the ramification in the pot. So it helps both ways. And mm, so if even if the pot gets dried, the tree doesn't dry out because the humidity tray usually always has water in it, and the tree just does very well with it. So this is the Ficus Microphilia or Australian ficus. Here are some cuttings that I've taken from this from those species, and they do quite well as cuttings. The nebari on these things is quite substantial. So every when I will pot on it, I will expose the nebari, and it'll come out quite well. Uh, yeah, you can see the leaf size is quite big. I haven't really done anything to these trees. They must be about 4-year-old cuttings. But yeah, I like uh, the macrophylla. The leaves are nice and dark. They're quite beautiful. Here's how I would take Ficus microphylla cuttings. I'd put 4 or 5 of them in a pot and just let them grow. And you can see they do quite well as they grow on. Uh, this one has been let to grow for a while, and the main stalk, which is much taller, and it developed a thickness because of that. I've cut off the stalk. It's died back to the node below, and from there it started off its own journey again. So it'll be there for another 5-6 years before I decide to prune back, and then I'll have movement in the trunk anyway. So it'll be kind of nice. So the Ficus Microphylla, or Australian ficus as it's called. This particular ficus is one of the few ficus creepers. Ficuses don't generally are not generally creepers, but this particular one I think has also a variegated variety that I've seen. I have one somewhere in my collection, but I couldn't find it for the video, which happens to me often. But there you are. I have select quite a few trees, and sometimes they do tend to get lost between themselves. Anyway, this is a whole lot of cuttings that I had taken from the main tree. Well, not the main tree, from some of these creepers on this, and you just stick them in a pot and they take off. There's no as long as you keep them in a nice greenhouse, warm and humid, they just flourish. They have no problems about carrying on growing. This one has been grown on a tanuki. It's not a full tree by itself. It's a dead Chinese elm that I've tied the creepers when they were about this size onto it, and as you can see, it's taken over the tree quite well. The nebari, or the root flare, is started out quite beautifully, so it will carry on as we grow. The leaves are almost heart shaped. I think they're quite cute, and they're very small, so they make nice bonsais. As tanukis, they are ideal little things for tanukis. You can see I've held the tree down with heavy aluminium wire at the bottom, which anchors it to the base of the pot. Again, this has also been grown in a humidity tray, and as with most ficuses, it enjoys the humidity. I have to give this tree a pruning at some stage, maybe in spring, when I can take some more of these prunings and grow them on. There are not many people who grow these as bonsais, and I want that to change a bit. So I think they're quite rewarding. So anyway, the creeping ficus, or Ficus pumila, as it's called, Ficus pumila. Ficus Ginseng. The Ficus Ginseng is nothing more than a baby Ficus Microcarpa, and it's the codex that is grown from seed, and the growers tend to let it grow for a few years, and then they push the soil lower down, and then this exposes the codex roots. The roots have stored the food, and because they don't really have much leaves on top, it's not used them as yet. I've pruned off some of the more uglier roots on this tree. This particular variety has something called a Ficus India grafted on the Ficus Ginseng or the Ficus Microcarpa. The Ficus India has very, very dark leaves on it, and these trees are commonly sold in supermarkets and in the UK and IKEA and many places. And the thing to look out for when you're buying these, if they're sometimes sold as bonsais, if you do happen to chance across one, check to see that the grafts it's not grafted badly, because many of the times the grafts are the first things that will go, especially in drier conditions. As soon as you bring them home from a nursery, you will find that you may end up losing all the grafts on it. And sometimes they will revert to the Ficus Microcarpa underneath, and they'll have lots of new shoots from it, which is the state that I prefer them to be in. But when they just have a codex and no trunk above it, it's kind of difficult. But you do have lots of much bigger specimens like this, and they're not very expensive at all. And on them you'll have a whole lot of these grafts, and often these trees suffer a lot. During the last 8 years or 9 years, they were quite popular at many of the supermarkets. They were sold at about 50-60 pounds each. But I had at least 20 or 30 of them brought to me because they were dying away, and then I figured that the best way of actually letting these things carry on is to let them revert back to the Ficus Microcarpa stock underneath. They are much more robust than the Indian ficus, which is just grafted on, and the weakest point is of course at the graft joint. So any time there is a lack of humidity or lack of watering, or you forget to water it, the graft is let go, and you're back to the original Ficus Microcarpa underneath. So watch out for these Ficus Ginsengs. They are, I think, very cute little trees, but they are susceptible to quite a bit of problems. So take care when selecting one of these things. This one is a strange looking tree. I don't know, maybe a goblin. But anyway, a Ficus Ginseng, baby Microcarpa. That's about all that it is. This is the Ficus elastica, or in India it's called the rubber tree. It's not really the tree that we make rubber as we know it from making tires and tubes and what have you. But the latex on this sometimes confused people as to being, they thought it would be good for rubber. But anyway, this is just a normal ficus species. It's a Ficus elastica. In India, it's very, very common as house plants. The leaves can be a dark green to an almost black color, and I've seen lots of nice black ones. I've seen variegated ones too, and they're quite lovely. They could be dark and light green, or they could be green and yellow. But yes, the Ficus elastica is a great species to try in bonsai. But the bonsai, the tree is quite coarse. The branches are quite coarse, so it never really makes specimen grade bonsais, if that's what you want to call them. But I just love them. They're different. They're big leaf. They're so much of color and so much of character in them. And then they have tons of aerial roots when you do let them grow in humid conditions. These ones have been growing indoors, so not really as profuse. I've tried to aerial this, which is, you can see the roots have already started developing quite well in the tree, so they'll make great cuttings afterwards. But yes, you can see the roots have filled out quite nicely in this. So the Indian rubber tree, or Ficus elastica. So for you guys back in India, this is a great tree to experiment with. This is a Ficus religiosa, seedlings that have been grown. They're all the same age, but some of them have grown better than others. I've had 3-4 pots of these. Most of them have been given away to my Indian friends. But yeah, they are an auspicious tree for lots of Hindu families, so and so they tend not to last at me too long because they are taken away by my Indian friends. But I've been growing them to try and bonsai them. They make great bonsais. When I was in India, I saw some real good specimens. I have a few friends who have real lovely ones in Pune and Bombay. The Ficus religiosa goes up all the way to Udaipur and even Delhi, I'm pretty sure. It has more of a waxy leaf than the ficus, than the bud itself. So it tends to grow more in the wetter areas than in the drier areas. But yes, the Ficus religiosa is a great tree to bonsai. In the UK, they are quite problematic, but I'm persevering. They get attacked by bugs and fungus, and they don't like the cold, so they can suffer a bit. They do very, very well in indoors. I have friends who've taken the batches of seeds from me, pots from me, and their trees are 3-4 times the size of mine. All they've done is grown them indoors on little trays. So we shall see how they progress. But yes, the Ficus religiosa. Well, that's my collection of some of the collection of my ficus. That's some of the collection of my ficus. I have about 20 different species, but I'll carry on with them some other time at a later date. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and if you have liked it, click on the thumbs up below, and do remember to subscribe if you haven't already subscribed, as more and more videos will be released at least on a weekly basis. Thank you for watching, and do take care. Bye for now.